Love doesn't always begin with a fairy tale. Sometimes it starts with a contract. But what happens when hearts get involved? If this story touched you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd love to see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world.
What Charles hadn't noticed, however, was how upset Sarah was to learn of this. Nor did he appear to have cared about her at all from the beginning of their relationship. Upon realizing this, Sarah was overwhelmed by a deep feeling of envy. Why has God been so kind to that girl? She was beautiful, smart, good at studying, and was even deeply loved by an excellent man. She too lost her parents when she was born, which Sarah identified with. But Sarah was tasked with looking after her little sister, and was always a loser in love. Why? Why was her fate so miserable? She could ignore fate, after all. Fate was out of her control, and not everyone can have a good destiny. However, Charles was her beloved man, and he simply shouldn't love another woman. She was so jealous of this girl whom she had never met before. Although she felt so sad, she still kept calm and asked, "Now that we've established that you love each other, why do you still date me?" Charles seemed to recognize the gravity of her question. He turned around and looked at Sarah. "We love each other, but our relationship is impossible. I thought we could be together in spite of the objections from others, but we failed because of our parents." Charles turned around again, pushed his hair away, and looked into the distance. "My parents are traditional. Our family is high profile, so everything I do can be reported by the media. Such a scandal must not be allowed to occur in our family. They were strongly against it and prevented it in many ways. I have always been rebellious, so I could ignore them. Even if I needed to leave my home without anything, I'd have had no problem doing it, but Emma couldn't. She has always been an obedient child from a young age. At last, she compromised because my father became ill. She ended our relationship, knelt down in front of my parents, and swore that she would never love me again." "What about you and your family?" Sarah asked inquisitively. "It happened 3 years ago. The relationship between my family and me didn't improve since Emma came to find me and asked me to go back home when she was 20 and was going to study abroad." Charles began to smoke again. Sarah figured it out in her head. Charles was 31, while his sister was just 21. It had been more than 1 year since she had studied abroad. She couldn't help but ask, "How are things now with you and your sister?" Charles took a drag of his cigarette. "How are they? She refused me, and I can't do anything. She is my sister." Sarah asked coldly, "Charles, have you ever loved anyone except your sister? Why did you date so many women?" "I told you what I had with Emma was impossible," Charles explained and turned around. He noticed that Sarah had backed away from him and realized something was wrong. He held Sarah's shoulder and said, "Sarah, what's wrong with you? Although it's true, I deeply loved my sister, and I've dated many women. It's all over now. I want to be with you. Things with Emma will never be the way they were, and am not willing to disturb her any further. I really want a new life with you." Sarah's voice was still cold. "Charles, I'm just a substitute, a tool to help you to forget about your sister." She looked at Charles and tried to fight back her tears. She had waited for him for a long time and watched him date so many women. She was just a secretary at his beck and call. Finally, he showed his love for her, but there was still another woman in his heart. He regarded her as a tool to forget his beloved woman. Charles seemed to feel her sorrow, hugged her suddenly, and put her head on his shoulder. Then he whispered into her ear, "Sarah, you can trust me. I won't ever be with her. You are different from all those other women. I really want to be with you. If I didn't, then I wouldn't have cut off relationships with all other women. Don't you believe me now?" Sarah sobbed gently. "If you have accepted that it's over with her, why do you still keep her photo in your wallet? Why do you still miss her? Don't you see how it's hurting me? She is my sister, of course. I miss her. But you should know that she and I can't be together even if I miss her sometimes. You are the one for me." Sarah was still sad and asked, "You date me because you and your sister are incompatible. But one day, if your sister finds you and wants to be with you at any cost, what would you do?" Charles stopped for a long time, then answered, "That's impossible. Emma swore she wouldn't be with me. She is sensible." Sarah leaned on his shoulder and sobbed. Charles hugged her and comforted her. He seemed to enjoy a moment of tranquility. Though sad, they were unwilling to say anything, and both kept quiet. However, who knew her words would come true many years later? It was 11 o'clock when they got back to Sarah's home. Charles hugged her and wished her a good night. Suddenly, Charles' phone started to ring. He answered, "Hello," then remained silent for a long time. He looked a little shocked, then confused. Sarah didn't know whom he was speaking to, and she just looked at him. At last she heard, "Emma, you did come back. Are you at the airport now?" "Okay, I'm coming to pick you up." At that moment, Sarah didn't know how she felt about what had happened and just stared at Charles. Keeping silent, she felt her heart continue to sink. After Charles hung up the phone, he looked at Sarah and knew what she was thinking about. He hesitated for a while. "My sister Emma, she is back." Sarah responded quietly after a long pause. "I see. She is at the airport now, ready to see me. She didn't go back home, so I had to pick her up." Sarah nodded again. "Go on then." Her voice sounded calm, but Charles surely knew that something was wrong. Tonight, she had learned about his past, and on the same night, discovered that he clearly still can't forget about his sister. She had now returned, without warning, and Sarah had no idea whether Charles still loved her or not. Charles didn't know what to say, and maybe he hadn't expected any of that. After hesitating for a long time, he patted her on the shoulder and said, "Things between her and me are over, so don't worry." "I'm not worrying about anything." Sarah raised her head and looked at him. "You go, don't be late." Charles hesitated. When he looked into her eyes, he thought she really was okay, so he left. At first, he just walked at his normal pace, but soon he broke into a hurried walk toward the car, then drove away, leaving Sarah to think about what had happened. There were few people on the streets at night. The night felt as cold as ice. Sarah was freezing, and she didn't know why she felt so uneasy. Charles hadn't actually done anything. But now that his sister Emma had come back, she felt a lot more insecure. She wasn't sure whether Charles would upset her or not. When Sarah came back home, she felt very tired, so she went straight to bed without washing. She recalled Charles' words, and she still remembered his soft tone when he described Emma. It seemed that he relished thinking about these cherished memories. In fact, he may still love his sister even now. Sarah tossed and restlessly turned as she processed the thoughts in her head until she decided that she was unwilling to go on thinking. The next day, Charles was late. However, as he was president of the company, no one could question him. Sarah, however, was worrying. She didn't know what had happened between him and his sister. Charles didn't arrive until after 10 o'clock. When Sarah saw Charles walking to her from far away, she stood up in haste and greeted him formally. Charles looked at her for a little while. "Come to my office." Sarah followed him obediently, and she didn't know whether she should ask him what happened last night. She also thought she shouldn't ask more because he had assured her that Emma was just his sister, therefore she remained silent. Sarah kept her head lowered. Then, unexpectedly, Charles turned around and hugged her after he closed the door. Sarah felt surprised. "Charles. I'm sorry to leave you worried," Charles murmured. "Last night, I took her back to the apartment and that was it. I only want to be with you, even if she was my girlfriend. Please trust me." Sarah didn't know what to say while held in his embrace. Charles lifted his head and gazed deep into her eyes. "Do you trust me? Would you like to be with me?" Sarah hesitated for a while, then changed the topic. "What will your sister do now that she's back?" "Just handle some procedures. She needs to go abroad in about a week." "Okay." Sarah lowered her head and asked, "What about her? Don't you care about her?" Charles smiled. "She is not a child. We are having lunch this afternoon. You should come with me. She told me she wanted to see her future sister-in-law." "See me?" Sarah pointed at herself, a little surprised. "Yes. Don't you want to go?" "No." She thought it was too abrupt. She didn't know what would happen when she met Emma. However, she was very curious about her, so she nodded. "All right." Charles laughed and hugged her again. "You're so kind. Okay, let's have lunch this afternoon." After work, Sarah waited for Charles. They drove the car out of the company building together. Sarah still felt a little uneasy and couldn't help but ask, "Did all your ex-girlfriends go to see your sister?" Charles was driving. He turned his head around and looked at her, then continued to look ahead and smiled. "Why do you look nervous?" "I told my sister that you are my destiny, so she was curious to meet you." "Destiny?" Sarah pointed at herself. She felt satisfied when she saw his smile, and it was one of the most reassuring things that he did. His destiny for her, it means a great deal. Did he really think that, or was he just trying to comfort her? She said nothing the whole way to lunch. To Sarah's surprise, Emma was waiting for them when they arrived at the restaurant. Sarah followed Charles inside. When she noticed them, Emma stood up, and Sarah finally saw her. Emma looked like a young undergraduate in a tracksuit and wore her hair in a high ponytail. The most noticeable thing about her was that she was very beautiful. When she smiled, there were 2 sweet dimples on her face, which were incredibly attractive. She smiled at Sarah as she walked in and greeted her. "Hello, are you Miss Tyler? I'm Emma." Her voice was gentle and soft. It made Sarah feel comfortable. Sarah didn't see her as a rival when they first met, but she did sense a great distance between them, from her age to her temperament. No wonder Charles described her as a dream girl. No one could compare to her. Sarah felt a little intimidated, but she dared not to show her insecurity on the surface. She just smiled. "Hello, I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you." The 2 girls shook hands, then sat down. Before ordering the meal, they talked to each other for a while. Looking at Sarah, Emma smiled and talked to Charles. "It is so lucky of you to find such a good girlfriend. You should cherish her." Charles laughed and answered, "I'm really lucky to have both a good sister and a good girlfriend." While Emma and Charles laughed away, Sarah sat beside them, feeling embarrassed as they had so many common interests, and happily chatted with such ease. Sarah was so quiet and didn't like to say too much. Furthermore, their happy chat made her even quieter than before. Although they both tried to chat with her so as not to exclude her from their conversation, she still failed to follow their topics. When the waiter came to take their order, they finally stopped talking. Charles passed the menu to Sarah to let her order, and the waiter also gave a menu to Emma. As it happened, Sarah was a little upset when she saw Charles and Emma chatting with each other so excitedly. Therefore, she didn't have much of an appetite. However, Emma seemed to be excited when talking about the dishes on the menu with Charles, but never asked Sarah for any suggestions. Perhaps just because she saw there was a menu in Sarah's hand. Maybe that was very normal behavior, but Sarah still felt unhappy and uncomfortable. She looked at the menu and decided to order a sweet and sour dish. To her surprise, Emma frowned and said, "I don't eat sour food." Reacting to Emma's complaint, Sarah raised her head and looked at her. Charles asked, "Aren't there many sweet and sour dishes abroad?" Emma covered her nose and said, "The sweet and sour dishes abroad are different from those at home. My dear brother, don't you know it? What's more, I never eat any sour food of any kind. Even smelling it would make me want to be sick." With a look of reminiscence, Charles nodded. "Yes, you never could shake that habit." "Right, well, we won't order it." He passed the menu to Sarah again and continued, "You can order something else. Emma can't stand sour food." Suddenly, Sarah no longer wanted to eat anything. She wanted to order that dish to stimulate her appetite, but Charles didn't let her order it just because Emma didn't like it. What was she supposed to eat? Emma seemed to feel bad for refusing her order. She passed her menu to Sarah and said, "What about this dish? This one is a Western dish, and it's very delicious and healthy." Sarah didn't answer her, so Emma thought she must not like this one. Determined to find one she liked, Emma suggested another one. "Perhaps this. This one is also delicious. Have you eaten it before? Do you want to try it?" Emma was very enthusiastic when introducing the food to Sarah, but Sarah just stared at her indifferently and finally said, "Anything is fine. I don't mind." Charles noticed Sarah's indifference and Emma's enthusiasm, and suddenly felt annoyed. "Emma, forget it. She doesn't want to order." At last, they just let the waiter go. Charles didn't want to talk to Sarah anymore and so continued to chat with Emma happily. Since they hadn't seen each other for a long time, they had so many things to talk about, allowing them to forget about Sarah completely. Throughout the meal, Sarah became steadily more embarrassed and upset, but she couldn't express her displeasure, so she just kept silent. After the meal, Charles had said he would take Emma to her apartment, so Sarah said, "Take her back home. I can go home alone." She didn't want to stay with them anymore. Emma looked at her doubtfully. Charles held her hand and said, "Why are you angry again? Can't you just be friendly?" He was angry with her. Sarah couldn't stand it anymore and laughed. "I am a little uncomfortable. I just want to walk back home. Is that okay?" "If you are uncomfortable, you should take the car." "Why are you angry?" Charles said coldly. Sarah felt ridiculous and looked at Charles in disbelief. However, When she saw Emma was looking at them, she thought that she couldn't let her laugh at them. Therefore, she sat in the car without saying anything. Then, Charles said to Emma, "Hop in." Sarah noticed how his tone was so gentle when speaking to Emma as he courteously opened the door for her. On the way home, everyone in the car was silent. Sitting in the back seat, Emma looked at Charles and Sarah and tried not to say anything so as not to create more awkwardness. Finally, they arrived at Emma's apartment. Seeing Charles was preparing to escort her upstairs, Emma quickly stopped him and said, "Brother, I can go upstairs by myself. It's so cold outside. Go back home." She then got out of the car and ran upstairs quickly. When they were alone again in the car, Charles turned to Sarah and said to her angrily, "Couldn't you be more polite? My sister hasn't come back for a long time. Why are you angry with her? I have told you many times how she is my friend, and you still won't accept her." Hearing his complaints, Sarah felt angry again. In his eyes, everything she did was wrong. He already knew that she didn't like Emma, but he still ignored her and talked with Emma happily when having dinner. She could stand this because she knew they hadn't seen each other for a long time. When she had ordered just one dish, Charles immediately refused it just because Emma didn't like the smell of it. Before getting into the car, she had already said that she was uncomfortable. Nevertheless, he still forced her into the car just so he wouldn't hurt Emma's feelings. Had he taken care of her feelings? He only wanted to meet all of Emma's demands, and didn't even care about whether his actions had made Sarah sad. He told her that he didn't love his sister anymore, but why did his behavior give her the feeling that Emma was more important than her in Charles's mind? Thinking about these things made Sarah even angrier, but she didn't want to argue with him. She quickly got out of the car and left. She no longer wanted to talk with this man. Charles shouted at her, "Sarah, what do you want me to do?" Sarah quickened her pace, ignoring his call to her, so Charles had to get out of the car in order to get close enough to talk to her. All of this was witnessed by Emma, who stood at the window of her apartment. She saw that Charles ran to stop Sarah and ask her, and then they argued with each other. However, they still tried to repress their voices because they didn't want to be noticed by anyone passing by. Emma also noticed how irritable Charles was when talking to Sarah as he grabbed his hair. Sarah seemed to question him. At last, Charles noticed a passerby and grabbed Sarah's hand to force her into the car. Shortly afterward, the car started and drove off. Emma closed her eyes and frowned as if she could feel Charles's pain as strongly as he did. She whispered to herself, "Brother, I'm sorry. I don't want to ruin your relationship with your girlfriend, but sometimes I can't control myself. I can't stand that you are with another woman even though I know we can't be together anymore." Suddenly, she fell to the floor, feeling so grieved and blaming herself for tonight's actions. Staring at the ceiling, she had no idea what she wanted to do. Although she felt sorry for Sarah, she believed that Charles was in love with her. In that year, she had tried so hard to want to break up with Charles. She was forced to do that. Originally, she thought that she could forget Charles. However, to her surprise, the men she met after Charles could never quite compare to him. No one could love her as deeply as Charles. Now, even though she knew they couldn't be together in the way they had been, she still couldn't let him be with another woman. Closing her eyes, Emma thought that perhaps she was selfish. However, everyone's love was selfish, so the only decision she could make was to hurt Sarah. What's more, Charles may not blame her after he knew the facts. After all, who he truly loved was her, not Sarah. Assured by her realization, Emma smiled. Sarah didn't know what to say in front of Charles. They had been silent ever since they'd driven Emma back to her home and argued with each other. Charles drove the car, and Sarah sat in the passenger seat quietly, looking out of the window. Then, they arrived at the company building. As soon as the car had stopped, Sarah quickly got out, ignoring Charles in the driving seat. Glancing at her, Charles was livid, so he slammed the car door shut behind him and followed her. When he entered the hall, Sarah had already entered the elevator, and the doors were closing. Charles could have run to make it into Sarah's elevator, but he didn't want to as he saw it as a compromise. Then, when he walked into his office, Sarah had already begun to work. Charles thought that as he was the CEO, in this building, Sarah wouldn't dare ignore him, so he walked over arrogantly and glared at her. To his surprise, Sarah completely ignored him. Even when he entered his office, she still lowered her head and continued working. In the past, when he entered his office, she, as his secretary, would have stood up and bowed, saying, "Hello, Mr. President." Now, however, she had the audacity to ignore him entirely.